Hey everybody, we are officially live. I'm so excited to dive into another pre-symposium panel as we lead up to our executive symposium on December 5th on the topic, how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. And so as we work up to this executive symposium, we bring in attendees who are going to be at the event to discuss their thoughts on the topic itself. We've got three great guests with us here today. We've got Glenn, we've got Randy, we've got Duane. Thanks for being here. Glenn, do you mind introducing yourself?
No, not at all. Glen Elias, I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Unitech Global Services. We are a fiber optic construction company based in Dallas.
Very cool. Randy, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Randi Deckard, and I'm the Senior Vice President at Bessler, and we're a healthcare finance firm. So we help hospitals recover revenue and protect reimbursement, and I'm located in Dallas as well.
Very nice. And then Duane, how about you?
Great. Morning. Duane Kingery. I'm with Bearstone. I'm the Director of Sales, and we are a managed service provider for telecommunications, and we have a telecommunications expense management platform that we've built and provide to our customers.
Amazing. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is through our executive symposium. So if you're watching this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'd love to meet these three great leaders, or I'd love to join the conversation, come RSVP for the executive symposium on December 5th. I'd love to see you there. So let's dive in. Topic is how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. So one thing I often see, especially when it comes to creating cross-functional communication and collaboration, is scenarios where it almost feels like there are different colors on the volleyball and every department represents their own color. And sometimes they're almost like competing tribes within an organization. And they're like, well, we represent support and we represent sales and we represent operations and we represent HR. And it's easy for people to get really frustrated at each other because sometimes you've got finite budgets. Sometimes you feel like someone's budget is diminishing someone else's budget within the organization. Sometimes there's just not clear priorities being laid out by the executive team to everybody else in the organization. And so ultimately it creates this friction across teams. What I'd love to know is when times are difficult and we're not in rainbows and butterfly land where we've got infinite budget to spend on every single department, where everyone gets every dollar that they wanted to get allocated to their teams. When things are difficult, how should we as executives communicate that throughout the organization to create effective cross-functional communication and collaboration, so then everybody's clear in their understanding of the scenario, even if it's not getting what they wanted to get? I'd love to learn, what have you found to be effective when communicating, like, hey, unfortunately, we weren't able to pass everything in your budget, but we were able to pass this. And here's why we did that. And this is why we, maybe funded all of this one department's budget, but why we didn't fund all of your department's budget. I'd be curious to know, what have you found to be effective with communicating and letting people down easily and communicating the vision, strategy, priorities moving forward for the organization, just keeping everybody engaged as you have that dialogue with them.
Do you want me to go first?
Anyone can go first. Yeah, dive in. So
I'll go first. And I got excited about this, Garrett, because we're in the process of trying to acquire a company. And I had one of the people in the to-be acquired company call me specifically about a meeting, a cross-functional meeting that we had. This literally just happened a couple of days ago. So I'm going to give you three things that he told me. He was giving me feedback for why he thought the meeting that we held was successful. And I sat and listened to these three things, and they're pretty much my view anyway on how to collaborate across a cross-functional group. So first, he said, spending time up front, making sure everyone is aware of the goals and the objectives. And you can't circumvent that. You can't try and speed it up. You have to give it its proper place, because if you don't do that, not having someone up to speed on what you're trying to accomplish sort of feeds into different tribes and people getting stuck in their own place about what they think is right. So it's critical to get everybody on the same page right up front. The second, and this seems simple, but close your mouth and listen. People, my experience is that people want to be heard. it's not a whining session, but they want their obviously they're in that meeting for a reason. They're not just there to sit and listen. And so they want to give their opinions. They want you to leverage them for the expertise that they have. And so, listening really well, particularly if you're the one leading this cross-functional group, I think is critical. And then the third was these regular check-ins. I know it seems simple, but I can't tell you how many projects I've been involved with where, people got the first two right and then didn't follow up, and these projects sort of die. And then when the next one comes along, people are like, oh, here's another one. It's just going to die because they're not going to keep it up. So we did all three of these things. Obviously, we were trying to acquire a company, so we're going to keep doing them. But anyway, I just got that feedback the other day, and I thought it was right on point.
Randy, Duane, what are your thoughts?
So, I would just add, on the first point, I call it shopping the halls. So ahead of time, having those conversations and ultimately going in and realizing you're not going to be able to please everyone, but making sure that you can find that common ground um, of the overall business objective and how that person plays into it. So, I'd like to say we always make decisions logically. That's not true. There's a huge emotional component. And so, like I said, really understanding not only who who you're dealing with is just as important, right? Like who's like resistant, and but why are they resistant? Peeling back the onion. And ultimately, there's an overall business objective, and everyone, of course we want everyone to swim in the same direction. And sometimes you have to have those candid conversations, and you can only do that if there's trust, right? And so that's why I think shopping the halls is so important, so you can build trust and build a relationship. And it's not about liking me as a person, it's about trusting me to have the best, the business best interests in mind, and that, I may have to let, something burn, i.e., it's a priority for you, but it's not a priority for the business. And we have to let that burn. But that's a mutual agreement because we all understand what's best for the business.
It's good. To add on, I feel like it's important that the leadership team truly show that they're both all on board with those goals, right? So if we communicate goals and the leadership team is not on board with those goals, then it's tough for those that are following to fall in. I think it's also really important that as you go through the process that you celebrate each step as a victory. That we've made progress. We're getting through our goals, and I think it's really important that we celebrate those, and that as a team together we celebrate. So those are important steps as well.
Man, y'all have brought up so many really great points, and I mean, if I could distill this all, like everything what y'all have said, into like one kind of cohesive unit, I think one, it's obviously active communication, but two, being able to listen. So really, it's just really effective communication. But one thing that it's almost subtle, and I'm hearing it, but I'm paraphrasing it. Maybe I'm mishearing this, but it almost sounds like it's more powerful to give direct, clear communication than to taint something with toxic positivity. What have you found to be like, have y'all ever seen toxic positivity within an organization? And if so, how do you combat that? And when I say toxic positivity, I mean an executive's potential tendency to be like, everything's amazing. It's rainbows and butterflies out here. Everything's going fantastically. And then all of a sudden, they're like, we got to make a layoff. And you're like, where the heck did this happen? I thought everything was amazing, butterflies and rainbows. And sometimes I see a lot of executives fall into this toxic positive, this happy talk of everything's going amazing because they just want to appease people and make them feel like there's concerns shouldn't be concerns anymore. When in reality, it's like, hey, we should have an open, honest, and authentic dialogue here. How do you combat potential toxic positivity and root it out if you see it from your CEO or from your executive team or other leaders on your executive team?
So I've worked at organizations where, being privy to all the information and what was, shared in town halls was a sliver of the truth. And I think that, even though at that company there was a riff and very similar to what you just shared. It's like, hey, everything's great, and then we're going through a reduction in force. And afterwards, the leader, when we were talking, doing a post-mortem, the leader owned it and said, I really thought we could turn it around. And I felt like, it wasn't as close as it was. And of course, the data doesn't lie. And so I think it's really important, once again, going back to my shopping the halls comment, the first team, the executive leadership, has to be able to have, like, radically candid conversations. And it's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about the business unit economics, and the data doesn't lie. And really being able to, have those hard conversations as a leadership, and then agree together, how the future discussions with everyone else in the organization are going to go. But if it doesn't happen at the leadership level, that just all rolls downhill, right? Because then there's misinformation, there's not that transparency, and then you lose trust, right? At that company, once that riff happened, I will say there were a lot of people that left because they didn't trust what this leader was going to say next. And, you can't blame them. So it can be very devastating to the culture, if if you let that persist. This leader stood up and said, and owned it, and said, I own this mistake. I thought we could turn it around. We didn't. And from this point forward, I'm going to be more transparent. But that's a long haul to rebuild that trust.
So, from my experience in working for a very large corporation that made lots of adjustments and lots of reorganizations, and sometimes there were rifts that come along with that. I found it most positive to take the individual contributors that we were speaking with who have become distrustful in our organization, and we just sit down and talk about their accomplishments. And it kind of goes back to my comment earlier: celebrate the victories. So it's really easy to measure in a sales organization how you're doing. You've got a number that you've got to hit on a monthly, weekly, business day. So we would talk a lot about it. Where are you at? How you doing? And focus on their goals, focus on what they've accomplished, and celebrate the heck out of it. And say, we can't control everything, but what you can control is what's going on daily in your position.
And I'm going to be a little contrarian here. So it's not that I disagree with you, but I would add, and I'm curious what Glenn has to say as a CFO, is that the sales organization can be pulling in and making their number, but is it a profitable client? Or do the business unit economics, is the company still profitable? It may not even be that you brought on a bad customer by, not setting the right expectations, but it could mean that the paybacks longer. There are other things in the business development, et cetera. So once again, even though you may be hitting your number and you can celebrate as a team, what does that mean for the business?
No, that's a good point, Randy. And with our business, it's a little bit different because we're a construction company, and so we don't have a sales group. We have a group of people who are operators who happen to be talking to our clients. So for us personally, it's always a little bit different because we don't have someone that doesn't know what we do, and I don't mean this the way it sounds, but someone that doesn't intimately know what we do talking to a client. And so, yeah, that would be problematic if you brought in you could, like Randy's saying, Duane, I think, you could blow it through the water on top line sales. And, if half those clients are not profitable, that's obviously not going to help the business. And I don't think that's totally what you were saying, but you were just giving an example, I think. But anyway, Randy, I totally agree with you. Something Randy said, Garrett, that stuck with me about the toxic positivity, because I've seen it a lot too. is trust. Because I think what happens is people sort of listen to the person up front. They see the smiles and the hands waving, and it's like it feels good in the moment. But then if it turns out not to be true, especially if it turns out to be really not true, that person's completely lost their trust and respect. And so what I always tell people is, I'm from Jersey, you're going to get it straight. And if it's bad news, you're going to get it more straight because it needs to be said, it needs to be heard. You can be professional, right? I'm not advocating not being professional, but I don't know any other way to be blatantly honest. And people usually respond well to that, even if it's bad news, because at the end, they'll trust you more.
So, Glenn, I really like this thing that I'm circling around here. So you mentioned you give it to them straight, especially if it's bad news. My question is when? When do they get it straight? Like when I think about if we're on an airplane, if we're slightly off, our course, do we let them know the moment we notice that we're slightly off course, or do we wait till we get maybe halfway where we thought we should have been, and we realize we're way off course, and we're like, hey, you need to turn it around. Um, Another analogy that I'd like to think about it is, Randy, you brought up this point of your, old CEO saying, I thought we could do it better. I thought we could make it work. I thought we could make this happen. It makes me think of sumo wrestling. Have y'all ever seen sumo wrestling?
Yeah.
Imagine like two enormous human beings in the middle of a ring. There's a circle around them, and their goal is to push the other one outside of the circle. Everyone thinks that they're not going to be pushed outside of the circle, but when faced with an enormous human being who's even more enormous than you are, you're going to get pushed outside the ring. And so the point I'm kind of getting at is we all have these intentions and these goals of like, hey, here's where I think we could have done and achieved this outcome. How transparent are we when it comes to this communication of, hey, if we're slightly off the path, when do we let them know that we're slightly off the path? Or like there's a chance we could fall down here, or there's a chance that we might not be able to get to the outcome that we're trying to achieve. When do we let them know? And when do we incorporate the team with the potential solution? Do we kind of keep it all up top and say like, hey, you know what? We tried this experiment. It didn't work out. We're going to have to slash this department because unfortunately it just didn't work. Or do we say like, hey, we're looking at the numbers right now. It's not on a good path. If we don't turn things around in the next 3 months, we're going to have to make some hard decisions. Like, how do you go about communicating and keeping people apprised as to what's going on and what are the ramifications for continuing on this path?
Well, like Glenn, I'm a firm believer that, actions speak louder than words. And the more transparent you can be, you not only instill trust, but you can actually motivate people. Especially if they feel like they're in this together with you. And I was at a startup and we were talking about where we were financially, and we'd had to make some big investments, and that gave us a shorter runway. And as a team and as a company, we sat down and said, you know what, these investments were crucial in order to grow, but it also means we have a shorter runway. These are all the things that we need to do to increase the runway. And we got everyone involved, and brainstormed all the different ways that each department could help, increase that runway. Some of it was how we managed our supplies. Some of it was, directly sales related. Some of it was like post sales. How can we expand accounts because it costs us less? But every single person was involved, and we actually extended the runway. But I truly believe it's because we were candid, and said, the investment to grow was the right thing to do. Because if we didn't do that, we would stall even sooner. But the bad news is we have a short runway.
What did the executive team do to communicate that level of urgency? Because it's a really great story, Randy. And the reason why I asked that question is because so often we see departments get very territorial.
Yeah.
Scenarios where like, the recruiting says, well, my quota was to fill positions within a, 30-day period, and I filled all the positions. Well, we haven't needed to hire as much because unfortunately, the economy's down. We don't need it. They're like, well, that's not my problem. I'm here to recruit. And I fill my roles within a 30-day period. I don't know what's wrong with sales. They can't make it happen, but that's not my problem. It's like, well, we're going to have to slash your team because we just don't need to hire as much. How did your executive team go about conveying the nature of the urgency and getting everybody involved when the situation was dire?
Yeah, it was a step-by-step process. So the executive team first brought in first line leaders, explained to them and really, tried to understand, concerns that they might have, you know, where they might see challenges, just some initial ideas. And then it went to second and third line employees before there was a town hall. So by the time there was a town hall, a lot of people, this had already been socialized. So everyone came prepared to not only engage in the conversation, but there were some solid ideas in play already. And the town hall was really about cementing and getting additional ideas. And literally, we had daily stand-ups for, 6 months. And there were, first, second, and third line leaders at different stand-ups. And we were continually communicating with our team. And on a weekly basis, the executive team recorded like a mini town hall. So it wasn't always in person, but there was continual communication. If something is in front of you all the time, you know how important it is, and you know the part you're playing. And the thing that I loved is that every single week in that little 15-minute like recording, they would call out a team and or an individual that was making a difference. And so it was almost like a little bit of gamification because everyone wanted to play their part. And we got very creative in how we, some of the different teams approach things. But I truly attest the success of extending that runway to how candid we were and got everyone's buy-in.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think
celebrating
the,
milestones
oh, go
along the
ahead.
way.
Sorry. I think the answer to your question, Garrett, is it depends, in terms of how early or how, what point in the process do you start communicating? I my just from my own experience, I've found that usually earlier is better. But there's a trick to that, and the trick is what we found that's helpful for people is before you go into a meeting like that to kind of share either potentially bad news or actual bad news, is we usually sit down and have a planning session to think about everything someone's going to ask, because the worst thing is getting in there and not being prepared, and you get hit with three or four questions that you didn't think of before. You stumble a bit, and that what that tells people is that, oh my God, these folks came in and told me something, my life is changing, but they can't answer my question. Like that instills fear, it instills distrust. And so those sessions are really important. They're kind of painful, and some of the team members that you need to have in those meetings, they think it's a waste of time. But the times where it's worked really well, we kind of do a post-mortem after, and we look at everybody and say, remember that time that we got everybody in a room and we painstakingly we were not prepared with every single answer. And so the risk is, if you're not prepared and you communicate a little early, it could backfire on you.
Yeah, and I kind of disagree with that a little bit. One of my leadership philosophies and the executive team that I work with is that we don't always have all the answers. And this is just part of being human. And, checking our ego at the door and like I said, being vulnerable sometimes and saying, this is the best answer that, or the best solution that we have, but collectively someone else may have something else, and checking our ego at the door. And it's not about, yes, it's my job to lead and direct, but I don't always have, all the answers. And, when I've been vulnerable, with my team, or been in situations where other leaders are vulnerable, people tend to open up to that because it's not fake, it is authentic, right? And like I said, I have a network so I can rely on to get answers and everything else. But like there are times when you have to check your ego at the door and say, this is a plan we've made. I don't have all the answers, and this is why we're collectively meeting. And that's just like I said, been in my experiences. Sometimes it's okay to say you don't have all the answers.
Yeah, and our group's a little bit different. We're a construction company, so we have uh, hundreds and thousands of people in the field that don't see us every day, and
Sure.
they get a check hopefully at the end of their work, and that's pretty much their interaction with us a lot of times. And so, and I certainly didn't mean that we would sit there and kind of spew out the answers. It was more having them in our toolkit if they came up.
Sure.
And yeah, there were definitely things that we couldn't answer, but there were sort of more minor and hey, we'll get back to you, as
Mhm.
opposed to hey, you said to ask a question. I asked, am I going to have a job in 3 weeks? And you can't answer me.
Right.
That kind of thing, I think can be dangerous. But I totally understand what you're saying, Randy.
Go ahead and jump in. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to echo some comments that Randy made there as far as that vulnerability. I think it's important, and we don't always have the answers. And I've always had a respect for, I'll call it the Jersey way, right? You guys, you're very direct. I was born and raised in the Midwest, and we're maybe a little more touchy feely. But I want to ask Glenn, has there ever been a situation where that Jersey way of this is the information, this is I'm going to deliver it hard, has it ever failed you? Has it ever bit you?
Not yet. And I think, but I do think that one of the keys is I kind of always start with that so that people know it's sort of me and where I came up from and sort of in my DNA. There have been a few people that have come up and said, "Hey, you didn't need to be that blatantly honest." But I, for the most part, Dwayne, they've been, "Hey, he told me what he knew. He told me what he didn't know. I know I'm going to get it straight, and I know I'm going to, get the facts, and that's enough for me." Is generally what the feedback has been.
Right.
Well, and I think that I think I have a variety of thoughts on this. This is a really interesting conversation. But I think there's a power of being vulnerable, of just saying like, hey, I don't know. But I also think like I think you can also think about like putting myself in your shoes, what are the ramifications or what are the things that might be going through your mind? Like I might be frustrated at the fact that you're not hitting some sales number that I've set up as in terms of a quota for you. But what I might not realize is that I've also dumped 15 new sales associates on your team that you're asked to be a player coach where you're out there like trying to coach these sales associates while at the same time meet your own quota. And so you might not be meeting your quota because you're spending all this time coaching these newer associates who maybe lack the experience to do things effectively, and you're also accountable to their numbers too. And so I think that there is power in thinking about what are the things that people are going through ahead of time, because it can show one, empathy, but two, an understanding as to like what they might be going through, and somewhat above a preparation as to why they might feel that way. And for you to maybe double down on your point is like, hey, this is why I need to spend more time focus on your prospects and less time coaching these sales associates, because we know that these sales associates are much further away to closing a deal than you are with these ones that are like right at the finish line but haven't crossed over. I'm just, making an example up in my mind. But I think that there's, when it comes to, setting upfront goals and objectives, Glenn, you brought that up at the very beginning. I think having that prioritization process is really critical. So I guess back to creating cross-functional communication and collaboration. When a department is receiving news potentially that they're going to not get as much budget or receive information that they don't want to hear, how do you go about bringing it all the way back to the goals and the objectives? And how do you incorporate them and maybe adjusting the way that they work to being more complementary of what these ultimate goals and objectives are, even if it's outside of their traditional job role?
Mhm.
I mean, for us, it's doing what you just said. I mean, all of our key corporate goals are communicated to all the divisions and functional leads. And if we're going to make a change off of that, hey, our DSO target was 100 days. We're at 120. We need to move a different direction to kind of make up the other 20. We don't always get it right, by the way, but they're generally communicated, they're posted, people can see them. And then when we have something come up, it's, hey, we need to adjust because we're not hitting these. And some people may not like the impact on their particular group, but our experience has been that if you communicate the goals and you're communicating the performance, right? That's key too. You have to communicate the performance. That generally people understand. Hey, they told me. And actually, I left out one very important thing. We usually get people's buy-in on the goals. So they're not just the C-suite folks coming up with ideas and things. Normally we get feedback and so there's buy-in. And so if we're off target a little bit, we already got that buy-in. And so our experience has been people are more easy to kind of get on board and say, yeah, this may not be the best thing for my particular group, but it's in line with the company's goals. We're off target. We need to adjust. That's been my experience. If you get all those things right, it's easier, I guess, is the short of it.
And I think an important part is not to micromanage. And what I mean by that is, if I agree with everything you said as far as everyone needs to understand what the overall objectives are. And if something has changed, whether there's, less budget or whatever, I'm in healthcare, for the last, I don't know, 20 plus years, we've had to do more with less, right? We're used to this. But like I said, hire good people, smarter people than you, have those conversations, but also let them, use their skill set. Like, so how are we going to do it, even though this has changed? And have those conversations, because sometimes the stories we tell ourselves or what we think we know, because we're not as close to it as they are, they're the experts in their area. Like I said, having those conversations can be a game changer. I'm over sales, marketing, customer success. And I always just hire people that are smarter than me. And so when we have these challenges, you know, like I said, I let them talk, I listen because we can solution together, but oftentimes they come up with ideas how we're going to creatively address the gap because they're motivated to hit that goal. And like I said, sometimes as a leader, I have to say, I have to let a certain area burn or I can't give enough budget, but that doesn't change this. And, here are my thoughts. And then just, like I said, work on them. But because I'm invested in them and their success and not micromanaging, people I find tend to work harder for me and the business.
You're spot on, Randy. If you listen to those employees, get their feedback, give them an opportunity to voice their opinion, give some ideas around this particular whatever problem we're experiencing, or maybe it's a product that's impossible to sell. Been through that in my career. Listen to their ideas and take that back to leadership and give them some feedback. I think it's really a powerful thing.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to incorporate the ramifications too. Not to make people scared of anything, but I think to be very clear about what are the ramifications for and for not hitting said goal. Like I've seen some scenarios where, companies will say like, oh, we practice open book management. Everyone can see all the finances of the company. And they have, let's say, 3 down quarters in a row. Well, the executive team's perspective of what 3 down quarters in a row could be very different from what the employee's perspective of it might mean. The employees might be like, yeah, okay, we had 3 down quarters in a row. Maybe that means I'm not going to get my Christmas bonus. Okay. The executive team's like, we're going to have to make some layoffs. They're like, what the heck is going on here? I didn't know that this was like how extensive the, ramifications would be. So I also think there's a product of communicating not only like the goals, getting their buy-in on the goals, and what are like the subsets to actually achieving those goals, because sometimes these are big, hairy, audacious goals and we need to break them into chunks. But also if we are successful, what that could look like for them, like what's the in it for me part of it, but also if we're not successful, what are the ramifications that I could be pursuing? Because I think that ramification on the negative side is the part where people get surprised. And I think our goal as leaders is to minimize surprises at all steps. Like at the end of the day, sometimes things work out, sometimes things don't work out. In business, rarely does it always work out, almost never. And so when we hit scenarios where it doesn't work out, people get surprised when we've been painting this picture of gumballs and fairy tales for the entire duration of their employment with us. But when things don't go well and we have to make some hard choices and decisions, they're like, I can't believe my company would do this to me. They've been buttering me up this whole time, telling me I've been amazing, and then they get mad. And so I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on like the being clear about the ramifications part? I say that only because I feel like a lot of companies don't do a good job of that because they're afraid that if you share the ramifications, people are going to get nervous and scared and leave because they don't want to take on whatever risk they might perceive from the organization. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think this comes down to like the two C's, culture and communication. I've been at companies where there have been financial challenges, but the executive team is still getting their bonuses. And I've also been at companies where there have been financial challenges and the executives, stood up and said, we're not getting bonuses because we are investing in the company, or we're, slimming down X, from the type of coffee you get in the break room because we want to stretch our dollars. And I know that's a minor one, but still. And so I think it really comes down to, the culture and, what is continually communicated. Because I've seen it both ways where the executive team is really invested in themselves and not the people who are running the business, right? When I say the people who are running the business, the people who are in the day to day, right? I'm not saying who are making the decisions, but who make the business operate. And so if you have a executive team that has a culture of, we need to make sure that our people are happy and are able to continue to drive because that's the reason we're in business. That's the difference, in my opinion.
I'm with you, Garrett. Sharing the ramifications is important. The reason why some don't do it well is, a fair amount of people don't like sharing bad news and they don't like confrontation. But in business, you have to put that to the side and put the employees and your company first. And so I know for us, we've had rifts, we've had to close down locations. The times where it went well, I think I say went well, all things considered. No one wants anybody to lose their job, but the times where the communication was good and people weren't surprised was where we were completely open and honest, and we got to them as early as we could, so they could plan, and they weren't doing what you said. They weren't 6 months down the road and saying you kept telling me everything was fine. Now you're telling me I'm losing my job. I don't get it. I think most people here would tell you, hey, the C-suite in particular here has been very clear and open. We actually do share our bonuses. If we have an off year, we share that we won't take our bonuses. We do that.
That's fantastic. I think it's really positive, Glenn.
Randy, you shared a story about your CEO before where he said he thought he could turn it around and then he didn't turn it around. And you said he was really accountable and you felt like that did a good job of building trust within the organization. How do you call out a CEO when they're not being accountable? Like when you're in a scenario where toxic positivity, topic positivity, mass layoffs, it's everybody else's fault, finger pointing, blaming the economy, this, that, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Uh, how do you go about calling out a CEO when it's their own BS that's, not contributing to the solution and being a part of the problem? Because it's by the way, it's a tightrope. They also control your job. You got a vacation coming up in December. You're not trying to put your family's vacation at risk here by calling out your CEO. But at the same time, if you don't do this, everyone's going down. No one's going to have a job in God knows how long. So how do you go about that delicate balance of calling out a CEO when you can see it, everyone else can see it, but they're the emperor with no clothes, and no one wants to tell the emperor that he's got no clothes?
Well, I just think it's one of those things, for me, it's a issue of integrity. And so I always have to act with integrity. And part of that is, being candid. So like I I've been in a situation where I was at a company, reported directly to the CEO, and I did not agree with some of the information shared in the town hall. So I sat down with him candidly, one to one, and said, this is how it impacted my team. These are things that I've heard around the water cooler, and your actions did not match your words. And at the time, he took the feedback, but did not change. There was 4 or 5 leadership changes, and just people left, right? And ultimately, if the CEO is not going to listen, that's what happens, is that leaders won't stay because you have someone who is not willing to change. And I stayed for a year because I was really invested in what the company was doing, thinking that if I kept talking to him and putting band-aids on, because I am really good at cross-functional collaboration, that I could make it work. But it was a year and 11 leadership changes. So I don't have the answer because that did not work. But I share that I tried. So if Glenn or Duane have something that worked, I would love to hear it. But I tried for a year, and there were 12 leadership changes on the C-suite during my tenure.
Yeah, I don't know, Duane, do you have an example or?
I can't think of any other way than direct conversation. Obviously, this is something that can't be candy coated. And Glenn, I expect your voice is going to be extremely loud on this. You just got to be honest. And if you're not honest, then the word you used, Randy, that I really appreciated was integrity. We all have. We have to be candid with someone in that type of position because he's got everything at stake to lose, and he or she will lose everything.
Yeah, I had an example of a smaller company that I'm CFO. I've reported to the CEO. We were losing money. He was we were laying off a lot of people, and he had just bought a new boat and a new car, and he was like showing it off to people in the company. And I had to sit down with him and just say, you're going to lose a whole bunch of people here if you don't, stop doing what you're doing. And, if what I'm saying is, you're viewing as insubordination, then so be it. But I'm going to go down with a fight because you're going to come in here one day and half your staff's going to be gone. And it was a wake up call. He appreciated it, actually. It was a family run business. He'd been doing it for a long time, and they just always found a way to get by. This was like 2013, 2014. So things were kind of just coming back from the collapse in 2008, and it worked. I mean, he changed. He didn't change like 100%. He was still doing his thing, but he actually went around to people and apologized for being insensitive, and offered to meet people where he would normally never meet people outside of his direct reports. And I think he learned from it.
That's great.
That's an interesting story. I like all those stories. I think that they're really interesting. One thing that I found to be, or what I find to be interesting in this, and what I've seen other people do to be effective in this, is to, similar to kind of what Glenn was sharing before, of think about what are the things that this person's going through that I might not be privy to. And oftentimes CEOs have a board, and sometimes those boards are just straight nut cuckoos bananas. Like, you got some family members that were the kids of the founder from 50 years ago, and they've got a lot of ideas about how the business should be run, but aren't actually in the operations of it. And they put a lot of pressure. They put that thumb with the heat right on their CEO to go and do all these new things and initiatives. And the CEO's got to appease them because he or she's in a position of, they could definitely fire me if I don't do these things that they're asking me to. But a lot of these ideas and suggestions are just straight off the wall bananas. And that could be an influence in why a person's acting in a certain way. Now, Glenn, in your case, the getting a boat in the private plane or whatever, that's probably that's them, and definitely probably a good conversation to have. But when it comes to strategic decisions or organizational decisions where you're like, this doesn't make any sense, why is this going on? Coming to them and saying, hey, I don't know if you're facing pressure from the board. I don't know if there are other factors that are influencing this, but some of these things I'm not fully understanding. I'd love to maybe get on page with the strategy, because my understanding of the situation is we're rowing in this direction. What you're proposing is something that's slightly off over here, and the way you're behaving is slightly off over here, and it's communicating something not consistent with our strategic goal and vision that we're moving forward. And I just want to make sure that I'm in sync with you, because I just know that we may not be rowing in this correct direction if we keep rowing in this path. And I'm happy to change directions. I just want to make sure that we're all in sync together. I think one, communicating that we're all like rowing and we all want to be rowing in the same direction is big. Two, putting the empathy hat on, like you might be facing pressure that I'm not personally privy to. And three, that like I want to be in sync, and acknowledging that some behaviors that you're observing from the CEO may not be in sync with where the actual company's going. I think that can be helpful. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on that, but it's.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So, Glenn, Randy, Duane, this has been an awesome pre-symposium panel. I feel like we've covered a ton of ground here. I really appreciate you all being here and sharing your insights on how to achieve effective cross-functional communication and collaboration. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I'd love to meet these three great leaders, come to the Executive Symposium on December 5th. I'll post a link in the comments of this video on how to RSVP. But anyways, Glenn, Randy, Duane, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Those who are watching, thanks for being here as well. I look forward to seeing you all on the 5th.
Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you.